So as John said, I'm a professor at the Institute of Design, and I am also, as I like to say, a recovering consultant. I spent more than 15 years, we're going to start losing the specificity of the numbers soon, working in innovation consulting, and in fact, if you enjoyed Larry's speech yesterday, I worked with Larry for years at Dublin. I think this gives me a unique perspective on innovation itself as it is in a position on a trajectory, and also my particular passion, which is the role of communication in innovation. I'm just realizing I don't know how to advance the slides. I hope you enjoy this one. Thank you. Oh yes, big green button. Good human factors here. So I guess one of the questions I would have for you in thinking about the role of communication innovation is how many, if I could see a show of hands, how many of you in the last 6 months have had an idea about the future or an idea you wanted to bring into the world that you had to communicate to somebody who, one, did not inherently care about your idea, and two, were critical to its success? Okay, that's a good show of hands. And those of you who didn't raise your hand, how many of you believe that communication is important to the success of your work? Okay. So when I was writing this book, my editor said, you know, what if you're working on a problem no one knows they have? Which is a problem. But my experience in the world has told me, and subsequently upon publication of the book, is that this is a problem everyone knows they have. What they don't have is a guide to get their way through it and how to move through it. So you have innovators, and I like this diagram here because we are the Ernies. We are the innovators who are trying to have effect change in an organization, and we are working with the Berts. In this case, it might be the healthcare organization, it might be clinicians, but honestly, this dynamic is present in every industry that I've ever worked in, where we have these high-level conversations, and we use words like innovation and transformation, and in this case, patient-centered, or impact and outcomes. And using this high-level abstract language, we have an illusory sense of alignment. And then we leave the room. And what happens is that us Ernies are sitting here and expecting trust and patience and new behaviors, and we're excited about the new thinking and the possibilities that don't exist yet. And the Berts are like, where's the evidence? Where's the numbers? Where's the proof? Where's the meeting and the Gantt chart? The innovation has to happen on a Gantt chart. We have timetables, we have deadlines. And this kind of mental model clash is just one of the instances of how perspectives are not married from the get-go, often from day one. That the differences in perspectives, we have this illusory sense of alignment, and in fact, we are fundamentally miswired to succeed from that point on. And that diagram I didn't even think did a very good job. I'm really in awe of the stakeholder challenges in healthcare, especially. It's not just innovators and clinicians, it's patients and insurance and Epic, and IT and third-party providers and policymakers and patients, them. We have a stakeholder challenge of enormous consequence to get these people aligned and organized around a shared North Star, to move from just talking about something, from being excited about an idea that is revealed in a room, but never seems to be able to leave the room because after everybody goes, nothing happens. It's one of the pressing issues for innovators all across the world, not just here in healthcare. It is a standard challenge. I like this quote from Andy Parham. You know, typically when I talk to innovation groups, they're trying to get ideas to market. And really, most of the power and the ideas, the power to say no to ideas happens internally. So when I scratch under this and when I talk to people, the number one question that comes up to mind is, how do I sell my idea? How do I get buy-in? Can you just tell me how to get buy-in? And that is when I have to start unraveling everything people believe to be powerful about communication. This is an old model of communication. We have this idea that communication comes at the end of a project. When the ideas are finished, we've had to protect them from all the antibodies in the organizations that reject new ideas. So we've grown them in some sort of protected class or environment. Innovators are often physically separated in organizations. They get the cool coffee maker, they get to wear jeans, you know, they get the special accessories that are supposedly are incubating innovative ideas. And all they're really doing is becoming a people apart. They are seen as different in the organizations. They're seen as different from the BERTs. And so innovators put themselves in this awkward position. They create an event called a demonstration or a presentation. They put it at the end of their project. And now they've put themselves in the weakest position. Because if you wait to the end of your innovation project to engage the stakeholders, to communicate with the people whose cooperation you are going to need, then you have put yourself in a position of having to sell and persuade. And selling and persuasion is the weakest position to come from, because it distracts you from building the relationships you need to make your innovations work and from preparing the organization to implement. So this idea is standard practice in industries across the world, right? It's time to put together a presentation, time to have the big reveal, and all of a sudden, all we can do is reduce our stakeholders in the room to people who go, I guess I like it, or no, I don't. And they might ask hard questions because everybody's smart and everybody's passionate and everybody's motivated. But you have deprived them of the contact with the idea that is setting up a barrier to its success. So what's an option? I would say that we have new objectives in innovation, and this is the role of communication. We have to accelerate synthesis. We have to get ideas to market faster. We have to create clarity. Typically, clarity is not even 100% achieved in core team members' work. I know this because I hear from executives and executive ed, I hear from students that when it comes time to put together the PowerPoint, the person who puts together the PowerPoint comes back to the group and people are like, oh, wait, is that what you think we were doing? So all of a sudden, the person who puts together the PowerPoint actually controls the idea. And it reveals that there is misalignment among the core team. Well, if the core team is misaligned, how can you possibly get a larger group of stakeholders as vast as that network we just looked at? Framing the new for others, this is a notable challenge in innovation. You've created something new, you hope. How do you get people to see it from the future and not critique it from the past and from what they think they know about it? Framing the new is a set of techniques that can actually start to bridge people into a future state and to see it from a future world. Developing shared vision, this is the stakeholder alignment issue, whether it's within the team or with the larger working team or with the funders and the sponsors. How do you get that common ground built together? And how do you align the constituents around a course of action? Everything in innovation education is focused on creating powerful ideas. I don't mean to trivialize that. Good ideas, ideas that are worth the lifeblood of an organization and its employees, are hard. And if they're hard and they're really good, then they're worth doing. And the harder they are and the more worth doing they are, the more they are violent to the organization. Tony Salvador, who's head of User Experience Lab at Intel, gave this great presentation called Innovation as Violence. And what he meant by that is that big change, dramatic change, causes the human systems inside of organizations to somehow partially become obsolete or to put aside the agenda that they've been working for, or it questions the very expertise of the people in the room. This idea of aligning constituents is not a trivial challenge in innovation. And the biggest one, however, is building belief and conviction. I try to tell my students at the Institute of Design, you know, your ideas are great, they're powerful, they're not going to sell themselves. Good ideas are not that hard to come by. Great ideas, a little bit harder. The hardest thing is getting people to believe that anything can happen at all. Because honestly, most people kind of retreat back to their desks and they say, well, the lights are still on and the check keeps getting cashed. Can't be that bad. Getting people to actually engage in change and to work from a state of conviction is not something that can happen from a PowerPoint presentation. PowerPoint was never designed to build that kind of belief and conviction. It was about exposing people to information. Belief and conviction has to come from somewhere else. You know who has belief and conviction in the ideas? The people who made them. And it was the experience of making those ideas that built their belief and conviction. So in order, I would say, to simulate or to actually attract the intelligence of people in the organization to your idea, you have to allow them to participate in that experience with you, which means communication is not the thing that comes at the end. Communication is the thing that starts day one and proceeds all the way through the project. And as ideas develop, you are developing your stakeholder engagement with it. That the integration, the development of innovation and the communicating of that new thing that you are making have to happen simultaneously. That's how you move an idea through the organization without it being rejected as being foreign or unfamiliar or overly complex or too hard or something we already did. Tried that 10 years ago, failed miserably. Again, people seeing things from the past and often from a position of fear. So how do we avoid doing this? Stepping into our past practices to take new ideas and put them into old communication practices that kind of take the edge off the new. As Doug Wood just said, I'm offering some small ideas here that you can do back at your desk. One of the things I would encourage everyone to think of is communication is not a nice to have, it is essential. It is a platform for engagement, not a means to transfer information. So I have a short mnemonic here, this make, model, show, share, that I will take you through. I think these are things everyone can do and they make a difference because they happen day one. This first idea of making, prototypes are not a new idea in the world. This particular prototype that is up here on the screen is something that was done by a design team working with the World Watch Institute. And the question was how to deal with food shortages in starving countries. Many of those starving countries, 60% of the food never leaves the field. How can that be? 60%, that's shocking. So the student team put together with 5 markers, 3 hours, and 3 team members, put together this very quick prototype of a database that could be used with NGOs that help highly micro innovations that are tailored to certain geographies be cross-pollinated into other geographies that have similar conditions, but perhaps not a communication channel between them. So they put together this very quick thing, this little corrugated cardboard screen, and they made these pieces of paper that could slip between them. And they showed them to the client, Daniel Nuremberg, who was over the moon. She had never seen anything so explicit and concrete. And they were just kind of like what would be on the screen? They were kind of working through some of the specifics of their ideas. She took this particular prototype, she went back to her funders, was able to kind of give the same presentation, so they'd given her a tool for communicating the new. And she was able to get funding for this database and this concept that actually she had had something similar in mind for the past 10 years. That's a very powerful outcome for a bunch of corrugated cardboard and a bunch of sheets of paper. A different way to make is to make to learn. This is part of an asthma project that I was working on this summer. I'm part of Institute of Design as part of a consortium in the Chicagoland area. Chicago's the asthma capital of the country. It's a dubious distinction. And we are trying to figure out how to craft a study that is emergency room based and is an intervention to increase adherence to asthma guidelines. So one of the things we have to do is create a discharge document. Nobody we talked to, 22 interviews with ED staff and outpatient doctors, nobody likes their discharge documents. It's really hard to get a new one going in these new EMRs and their IT systems. So we put together this, we worked with the doctors to create, using the CARS framework for asthma management, put together this prototype where every piece can be removed. And we went and talked to outpatient doctors, and the outpatient doctors were able to then make the discharge document of their dreams, which is what we instructed them to do. I said, don't worry about how feasible it is, that's not your problem. Make the document you wish your patients were getting when they left the emergency room. And what they did were things like this. They ripped pieces of paper into little quadrants and they reorganized them, and they gave us instructions about how to make and improve this discharge document. And what was interesting is not only did we learn how to improve the discharge document, which we're in the process of doing for the study, I had just spent 45 minutes with these people having conversations in which I thought they were giving me specific information. And it wasn't until we brought this prototype out where we would finally get to a point where they would give us concrete information like, no, this has to be sequenced differently. And one of the things that's really challenging is that they have to have 5 instances of their nebulizer, but they've had 1, so that means 4, and it has to be spaced out in the following way. None of this was in the document. It was all at a very high level. And we also had doctors who said, listen, you have to address readability issues so that kids can get involved in their own care. This is a pediatric study. Can we please put visuals that they've seen before and they know, to start to involve them and to start shifting self-management to them. So this was one of the benefits of a very cheap, inexpensive, I just ran Post-it notes through the printer, my HP printer, and got to a different level of conversation with important stakeholders. Simple ideas, this is a kludgy sort of works-like prototype to try and understand how augmented reality could change a product experience. You can see these guys are very avidly looking at us. Sometimes you just need to stop talking and bring concepts out in a way that people can touch and feel and hold in their hand and explore for themselves. If that's making, I'd like to talk about modeling. It looks so complicated. Modeling is, in this particular case, is visually representing complex phenomenon. I like to dwell on this piece for a minute. I like to use it a lot. This is a model of how internet search works. And it was put together by Matt Leacock back in the days when he worked at Netscape. Those of you who are old enough to remember Netscape. It was like when dinosaurs roamed the earth. He worked with a brilliant man by the name of Hugh Dubberly out in the West Coast, and the vice president of product development came into Hugh and said, listen, we just got this new capability, i.e. we just bought a bunch of people, and the new capability produces really ugly stuff. Can you send a designer in to fix this? So Hugh Dubberly sends Matt Leacock in, happy designer, walks in, sits down, comes out of the meeting, all hangdog looking, and Hugh says to him, what happened? And he says, well, I was kind of kicked out of the meeting. Nobody knew why I was there, and neither did I. So he's in there with a group of opinionated, educated engineers who have serious and substantive work to do, and they can't figure out what Matt's role is. So Matt confers with Hugh, and Hugh says, here's a book, tells you about concept mapping. Take a look at that. All about concept mapping, and Matt does something, I think, somewhat extraordinary. He goes and he has personal interviews with each of those engineers, the ones who threw him out of the room, and tries to understand what their conception of the shared project that they are on is. And in the end, emerges with a concept map that talks about how search is going to work. They're programming this live as they are working. And he goes into the next meeting and shows them the map, comes out of the meeting, and Hugh said, how does it go? And Matt says, a fight broke out. And Hugh said, really? I looked at that model, I thought it was really good, what was the problem? And he says, well, it turns out two of the engineers don't agree on this very important part of how you land on the search page and how searches are displayed. Now this is fascinating, right? You have people who are in the process of coding something, engineers who did not understand Matt's role in their project. And now Matt emerges having talked to each one of them and integrated what he discovered about their processes into a single unified map, only to find out that the only person who really understands the project deeply is Matt. And in the process of highlighting something that was very important to surface, Matt has built the trust and working relationships that he needs to succeed in that environment. This is a concept of how to use models that is not just about the output of the model itself, but the collaborative process that can be involved in creating one. This is actually Hugh Dubberly's own work. Hugh Dubberly, if you have not heard of him, is known for concept maps and models. He works in healthcare now a lot, and he was trying to understand the cycle of self-management in health and created this great concept map, which is sort of mapping a user experience of going from the I don't understand, I have a problem, to actually succeeding in integrating new practices, effective healthcare practices. We can also model very abstract concepts. For instance, we use the word healthy a lot. Well, what does that really mean? We actually asked 6 women who were carefully recruited for their lifestyle activities and understood that they have a conception about how healthy food switches to unhealthy food that could actually be mapped and modeled and might be of interest to people who claim to be giving nutritional advice or claim to be creating food or claim to be in the healthcare industry. So modeling something, models are excellent for taking abstract things and making them concrete and allowing people to kind of understand the structural elements of something that's complex and messy. In my, they also don't have to be super complicated. In my short experience with the asthma project, one of the things that we noticed is that patients come in through the emergency room, they may wait for 20 minutes, then they spend 3 to 6 hours undergoing treatments and in there for observation. And then they get told they're going to get discharged. And they're tired, and they're hungry, and their kids are crying, and they are missing work, and they're missing school, and they just want to get out of there. And so what do? Time for patient education. It's the worst place for patient education to be placed. There's a reason for it. There's checkboxes in the IT system that have to be initiated by the attending and then done by the resident and then executed by the nurses. And so that doesn't all get done because it's called a discharge process. What, I said, if we could move the asthma education into the 3 to 6 hours where they're sitting there wondering what to do with themselves. It was a small observation. My 25 people in my consortium were like, maybe that's a good idea. And this very small diagram that I jotted down during an interview actually turned out to be a substantive change in the study. I'm feared I'm running out of time. Is that true? People that be? I'm out of time, okay. I'm just gonna very quickly go through this Garfield Innovation Center. The idea of showing work in progress, of creating evidence in organizations that other people can bump into, that something important is starting to happen in your organization. Using space, here's our asthma project again. We had 14 panels of consumer data, emergency department data, outpatient doctor data, put them all into a big space where people could come around. And then after we're orienting them to that data, opening the space up and actually holding decision-making processes inside that space, immersed in that data, surrounded by it, not in a PowerPoint where important information comes and then leaves, like television, it washes over us. Any information that needs to add to itself, PowerPoint is not the right medium for it. Sometimes you have to see all of it all at once, and spaces can be an active agent in supporting that process. I'm just going to keep going. Small idea, they're going to get the hook. Ideas you can hold in your hand and give to people so that they can start talking about the work and not just you. I'm the innovator. I had this unusual process. How many people here have ever heard of the 5 E's framework for understanding customer experience? Okay, some people have. I see the hands back there. The people who devised that actually decided to make this little fold-out piece that describes what the 5 E's are. On the back is how to do it. And they went to a client and gave 20 of them, and the client said, I'll take 500. And a year and a half ago, when I started doing executive ed, I started showing this piece, and people started pulling them out of the wallets and go, we have one of those too. That's an idea with legs. That's not the whole project. It was a piece of the project. It was one little idea to spark change about behaving in a new way inside organizations. There are tools that you can make to share. That's our asthma tool. It's got, you click on any little red, yellow, green square on there. You can go right to the patient data, right to the interview section of the transcripts that address those ideas. You can create powerful visualizations. These were done for LL Bean. What is it like to be a Mainer? They created, the design team at Continuum created these little hand-sized posters of their research about what it is like to be a Mainer, and handed them to people like, what a gift is that? Can you imagine how many conversations that sparked back at the office when people started putting that up in the cubicle and left that out on their desk? Sharing cooperative sessions, joint activities like games. These are the things that create the communication infrastructure that we need to create alignment, to start creating common ground, to start moving ideas out of just words, out of images projected on a screen, into action and into change. I want to leave you with one last thought. We have all these conventions left over from the 20th century and the way we work and the kind of work we had to do that we are still trying to make work in our 21st century work. The 21st century work is fundamentally different. We need to build knowledge and engage others. We need to exchange information. The target isn't the audience, the target is us. This is a fundamentally different conception and role for communication. We need story spaces, we need cooperative sessions, we need prototypes, we need things we can hold in our hand and talk about in a concrete way. That is the role of communication and innovation, I believe. Not got it solved yet, but I think in order to begin acting differently, we have to know that there is a different way to be. This is my favorite quote about communication in the whole world. It's a life lesson, not just a business lesson. But I think when we give presentations and we put important ideas into old contexts, we are assuming communication is transpiring when in fact it may not be. Thank you.
Hey, Kim. Thanks so much. And I love the Sesame Street metaphor there. So Bert is the innovator? Is that right?
Well, this rubber duck.
Ernie is
no, Ernie's the
guy.
innovator.
Oh, Ernie's the innovator.
Yes,
right.
Bert is the straight.
And Bert is the company guy.
The flat affect that Bert had was always a telltale sign.
Right. You know,
he was a suit.
My kids think actually that Bert and Ernie are married, and that
Ernie
writes musicals, and Bert cooks and picks the drapes. It's interesting that within an organization, there's obviously more than two types in terms of the innovator and the. I mean, there's a lot of people who are in gradations of innovation and that sort of thing. Describe a little bit how people can have a good idea but maybe be bad at communicating and need to find somebody else to be a facilitator or a team to actually present that idea.
I would say it's probably true with most innovators, is that the thing that innovators spark to is great ideas. And so to them, it's perfectly self-evident, especially I've worked with a lot of engineering teams, and you know, you talk to people at Skype or Motorola, they can't imagine a better version than what the thing that they have right in front of them. I think that innovators believe that ideas sell themselves and they are inherently attractive to everybody else, and they don't realize that everybody else doesn't quite think that way. I do think that there's a little bit of a mystique around communication, which is that, oh, you know, he's good with words, or that person's just naturally good at it. And that may be true, but I think innovation can be learned, and so can communication. We just haven't figured out that they need to happen together.
I think there's a lot of conformity in this sort of notion of communication, particularly in the sort of TED era where everybody talks in 20 minutes and everybody has some sort of inspirational message, and a lot of people don't necessarily communicate that way. And I'm just wondering if you know, and this was said earlier in one of the presentations yesterday, that you know, we talk a lot about innovation, but there's a danger that, you know, the out of the box can be the new box. That you know, you have a jargon and a language, but you don't necessarily have people communicating. You have the retreat, but you don't have the sort of sustainable communication that takes place day to day within the company.
Well, you know, I think that's a very good point. Marissa Mayer, the CEO of Yahoo, got a lot of flack for calling her Yahoos back to the mothership. But I think that anybody who's worked in innovation a long time knows that sort of enduring contact with people is critical to innovation. So the second question I get when I am in executive ed or on a book tour is, besides, you know, how do I sell my idea and get people's buy-in, is, so how do I make innovation work over the phone? Because there's so many conference calls and teams are, you know, work is being done remotely and people are geographically dispersed. And I don't have a good answer for that. I'm pretty sure that you need a lot of upfront work before human beings get together in a call and have shared reference points and have a shared mindset around what needs to be happening.
One of the people on yorn.com/transform noted, and you know, we get a lot of tough questions sometimes from these guys. For someone who's a critic of PowerPoint, you have a lot of slides.
This is true. Let me just say, this is actually I love that question. And it's not the first time it's been pointed out to me. There's nothing wrong with PowerPoint. There's nothing wrong with presentations. The question is what do you expect to get from them? And a presentation or a PowerPoint is about exposure. What that can do is that there are people in the room who might be ready to hear you, especially if it's like an engaging PowerPoint, it gets to the point. So it can self-select people who in the room who are ready to talk to you because they can see a future with what you are talking about. The idea that it can build belief and conviction, that it can transform thinking from old thinking into new thinking, that is something that takes repetition, and it's a process, it's not an event. So as an objective, as a way of exposing people to ideas, I know I have former students in this audience, and I'd be interested in hearing how fresh this material sounds to you, because it's exactly what I've been teaching for the last 5 years, but I have had students who look at my presentations later and go, did you ever explain that to us? And I say, yes, because we need iterative exposure. So PowerPoints, they're great for attracting attention, getting some ideas out there. Decision making, I don't think so. Transformation, I don't think so. Those are not the right tools.
They're not a substitution for the kind of convincing and igniting of passion that's going to make people actually act on some of these ideas.
It's exciting as holding something in your hand.
Right, exactly. All right, so last question. And you know, there's been a lot of talk here about finding people where they are to have an impact on healthcare. Many sort of suggestions about how to do that. And the idea that culture can trump strategy, that you can have a lot of strategies, but if the cultural rules of the group that you're trying to reach don't apply to the strategy that you're presenting, you're not going to reach them. How do you sort of engage in convincing people of ideas when they're in a culture that doesn't necessarily operate along the lines of, you know, the sort of office mentality or the corporate mentality or the, design mentality, even for that matter?
There's a lot of orthodoxy inside organizations of all kinds, healthcare, any industry, about how people exchange ideas and build and what you do when you get together as a group of people. One of the important things that has happened to me repeatedly is that people say, could you come in and talk to my organization because I went through this training with you, but nobody else is working this way and I need you to fix them, essentially. And I say, that's not going to work. No more than it may have worked here, me standing in front of you today. What's going to work is for you to be able to be different in some small but significant way inside your organization. No one is going to ask you to stop making PowerPoints. Nobody's going to ask you to start making prototypes. No one's going to ask you for these things. They don't know how to ask. They don't know that it could be different. So you have to lead by doing. And that's the only way I know to start orienting a culture to a different way of being in the world, is by doing it.
And also to recognize that maybe they do things in their own way and really understanding the language that they use to communicate, as well as the sort of, you know, it's a listening versus telling kind of tension.
Yes, I think it's a very good point. And so the other piece of that is building relationships. When my students go out into the world and they go into these innovation contexts, they say, you know, I'm not quite sure what to do, it's really frustrating, they don't think like I do. And I say, set yourself a big budget and take everybody out to lunch. Pick them off one by one. Go build relationships. Be curious about what they do and how things got to be the state of affairs that they're in today. Figure out the trajectory of that. And then ask how you can help. And that's building what you need to start to create change.
At lunch, Mayo or Sriracha?
Oh, Sriracha.
Sriracha, thank you very much. Kim, Erwin, thanks so much.
Thank you.